Father God, I just come to you and thank you for this opportunity. And God, sometimes I feel just not qualified to be teaching here at a Bible college, and both intellectually and spiritually. God, I just pray for your grace, that you would help me to communicate the truths that you have revealed both in your scripture and in the world, the natural world, with truth and with fidelity, and that I would be accurate. And God, I just pray for just today that the information would sink in, that we'd understand what's really going on in the academic institutions with the institutionalization of naturalism as a worldview. And God, I just pray for tools to be able to address it. And God, we do pray that we would have a greater impact in this particular area. So please bless this time in Jesus' name. Amen. Okay, so again, I just want to clarify, at the end of, when you go to week 5, down at the bottom, it'll say research. And then it tells you what we're going to be doing in class. So today we're going to be watching Expelled in Class. So don't make the mistake again next week, because I want you to come with come to class with some understanding of what's going on before we talk about it, and then it'll make more sense, and we don't want to repeat the same stuff. So so the video I want to watch is like an hour and a half long. I'm not going to watch the whole thing, but I'll watch a huge chunk of it. And I'm going to try to fast forward through the just different parts. I want to watch it first, and then I'll get through as much of this as I can. But, this is important, and you're going to have to get through it in order for you to be able to do your slides. Particularly, I have to get through that last part, the evolutionary argument against naturalism. So we're just going to start the video. So.
Are we supposed to have the handouts now?
Yes. Well, I'll give them to you. Yeah. I was really hoping to get the sound. We got to figure out the sound stuff. All right, you can hit the lights too. Here are the copies.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome. Today is my distinct pleasure to introduce a man who is recognized.
The battle of evolution is only one skirmish in a much larger war.
Science simply makes no use of the hypothesis of God.
Ask yourself, what has intelligent design given us? Nothing.
We cannot accept intelligent design as an alternative scientific theory.
They will never accept that we have a better argument. They just pester us and they waste our time.
Civil rights, to how to grow your life in 10 easy steps. Today, Ben is speaking on the topic that has become increasingly important to him over recent years. While Ben has always been an ardent supporter of science, lately he has noticed an alarming trend in the scientific establishment that could have dire consequences for every American. Without further ado, please join me in giving a warm welcome for Mr. Ben Stein.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you very, very much. Thank you. Thank you very much, everybody. Thank you very much, gangsters. Thank you very, very much. Freedom is the essence of America. We're talking about freedom of speech, freedom of assembly, freedom from fear, freedom of religion. Martin Luther King said, America is essentially a dream, and he said it is a dream of freedom and equality, and freedom is the way to equality. And America simply would not be America without freedom. In every turning point in our history, the decision has always been about freedom.
Freedom is what makes this country great.
Freedom has allowed us to create, to explore, to overcome every challenge we have faced as a nation. But imagine if these freedoms were taken away. Where would we be? What would we lose? Well, unfortunately, I no longer need to imagine. It's happening. We are losing our freedom in one of the most important sectors of society, science. I have always assumed that scientists were free to ask any question, to pursue any line of inquiry without fear of reprisal. But recently, I've been alarmed to discover that this is not the case. It all began when I met evolutionary biologist Richard Sternberg in Washington, D.C. His life was nearly ruined when he strayed from the party line while serving as editor of a scientific journal affiliated with the prestigious Smithsonian Museum of Natural History. Your office was over there?
That's correct. This here is the West Wing. Directly ahead of us is the West Wing of the Natural History Museum.
So now you're not there anymore because you're a bad boy.
No, I'm not. No, I was exiled.
You're a bad boy. You questioned the powers that be. What was Dr. Sternberg's crime? He dared to publish an article by Dr. Stephen Meyer, one of the leading lights of the intelligent design movement. The paper ignited a firestorm of controversy merely because it suggested intelligent design might be able to explain how life began. As a result, Dr. Sternberg lost his office, his political and religious beliefs were investigated, and he was pressured to resign.
The questioning of Darwinism was a bridge too far for many. The mentioning of intelligent design that occurs at the end of the paper was over the top. And I think the intelligent design proponents have raised a number of very important questions.
And you wanted to get those questions brought up and discussed.
Placed on the table.
Placed on the table.
People were so upset about it. They were so upset that you could see they had a physical, emotional reaction.
Wow.
They were saying that Stephen C. Meyer is a well-known Christian, that Stephen C. Meyer is an intelligent design proponent, that Stephen C. Meyer is a Republican. It was all couched in terms of religion, politics, and sociology. The way the chair of the department put it is that I was viewed as an intellectual terrorist.
Terrorist?
Because of giving the topic of intelligent design some modicum of credibility.
What happened to Dr. Sternberg was terrible, but surely it was just an isolated case. I was still pretty skeptical, so naturally I checked in with the head of the Skeptics Society, Michael Shermer.
So I can't prove there is no God or Yahweh in your case, any more than I can prove there is no Isis, Zeus, Apollo, Brahma, Ganesha, Mithras, Allah, or for that matter, the flying spaghetti monster. And think about just one thing. Why would the aliens look like this?
Well,
these are bipedal.
Who drew that?
Skepticism, it's not a position you take. It's just an approach to claims.
This one is called the borderlands of science, where sense meets nonsense. Is intelligent design nonsense?
Well, it's unproven. So in that sense, it's nonsense. So I would put it in the sort of shaded areas between good, solid science and total nonsense. You know, it's sort of 3/4 of the way toward the nonsense side.
But you think, nevertheless, people should be allowed to speak about it and publish papers about it?
They are free to write and publish and be heard in public forums and go to conferences just like everybody else does.
Well, what if a person published something, say at the Smithsonian, in favor of intelligent design and then lost his job over it? And it had been peer-reviewed, and published, and then he lost his job over it anyway. What would happen? What do you think about that situation?
I think that particular situation, there was something else going on.
What was going on?
I don't know. I mean, I don't know, because I don't know, but I think there had to be something. People don't get fired over something like that. You roll up your sleeves, you get to work, you do the research, you get your grants, you get your data, you publish, and you work your butt off, and that's how you get your theories taught.
Well, but wait a minute. What if you try and roll up your sleeves and go to work and work your butt off, and they say, well, we're going to fire you if you even mention the word intelligent design?
I don't think that's happening. Where is that happening?
George Mason University, Throughout its 50-year history, our mission has remained clear: to prepare a diverse population of students to think and to grow in a climate of unbridled academic freedom.
After Dr. Caroline Crocker simply mentioned intelligent design in her cell biology class at George Mason University, her promising academic career came to an abrupt end.
My supervisor invited me into his office. He said, "I'm going to have to discipline you for teaching creationism." And I said, I mentioned intelligent design on a couple of slides, but I did not teach creationism. He said, "Nonetheless, you have to be disciplined." At the end of the semester, I lost my job.
Not only did this well-loved professor lose her job at George Mason, she suddenly found herself blacklisted, unable to find a job anywhere.
So whenever I interviewed for a job, I would be offered it, usually on the spot. Since this has happened, and since people can Google my name, I'm finding that when I send my credentials, I do get interviews. I get many interviews, but I never get offered a job. I don't tell them about my science sin. I was only trying to teach what the university stands for, which is academic freedom.
There's nothing to be learned in neurosurgery by assuming an accidental origin for the parts of the brain that we work on.
It wasn't just biologists who were feeling the Darwinist wrath. When neurosurgeon Michael Egnor wrote an essay to high school students saying doctors didn't need to study evolution in order to practice medicine, the Darwinists were quick to try and exterminate this new threat.
A lot of people on a lot of blogs called me unprintable names that were printed. There are a lot of very, very nasty comments. Other people suggested that people call the university I work at and suggested perhaps it's time for me to retire. I realized when I kind of went public with my doubts about the adequacy of Darwin's theory that I would encounter criticism. What has amazed me is the viciousness and the sort of baseness of it.
I'm an old guy. I have tenure. I'm academically safe. But the young people and what is happening to them in America right now because of this scientism gulag is really terrible.
Apparently, Professor Marks was not as safe as he thought. A few months after this interview, Baylor University shut down his research website and forced him to return grant money once they discovered a link between his work and intelligent design.
In order to attract grants, you have to market yourself. So you put up sites and call yourself labs and groups and things like that in order to get visibility. And in my entire experience in academia, I never went to any superior and asked them any permission to put up any of these labs. So the fact that this was singled out, let alone shut down, is jaw-dropping. It's astonishing. I have never been treated like this in my about 30 years in academia.
Shut up, you freak! I say shut up! It's a madhouse!
If you peel back the onion, I think that there is no doubt that the center of this is my work in what some would call intelligent design.
People really get emotional about this. Whenever you say intelligent design in a room of academics, them's fighting words.
Creationists. Astronomer Guillermo Gonzalez found himself in a fierce shootout with Iowa State University following the publication of his book, arguing that the universe is intelligently designed. Despite a stellar research record that has led to the discovery of several planets, his application for tenure was denied, putting his career in jeopardy.
I worried about my tenure a little bit in 2005 when the petition was being circulated because I viewed that as a strategy of Hector Avalos and his associates to try to poison the atmosphere on campus against me because he knew I wasn't tenured yet and I was very vulnerable. I have little doubt that I would have tenure now if I hadn't done any professional work on intelligent design.
Dr. Gonzalez had this advice for scientists who might be thinking about following his example.
If they value their careers, they should keep quiet about their intelligent design views.
We know there are times and places to be quiet, and other times and places when we can make noise if we want to.
Will you show us?
discourse. Boys and girls, how would you like to show some of the ways we know of being quiet?
It's the kind of thing where you just learn to keep your mouth shut.
In addition to those scientists who were willing to appear on camera, we encountered many more who didn't dare show their face for fear of losing their jobs.
You use an intelligent design perspective to get the research done, but you're not allowed to talk about it in public.
And so there is definitely incentive, if you think about it, for people to remain within the mainstream.
You know, what's he up to? What is he thinking? Is he one of them? That kind of thing.
If I write intelligent design, they hear creationism. They hear religious right. They hear theocracy.
So it appears Mr. Shermer, the self-styled skeptic, was wrong on this one. Intelligent design was being suppressed in a systematic and ruthless fashion. But maybe intelligent design should be suppressed. I didn't like what was happening to these scientists, but on the other hand, we don't want our kids being taught that the Earth is flat or that the Holocaust never happened. It was time to ask the scientific establishment what was so bad about intelligent design.
Intelligent design people are not genuine scientists.
Intelligent design is a racket.
It's just propaganda.
The only intelligent thing about it is to have got people to call it that.
It's really very stupid as well. Everybody knows science education in America is appalling. What we don't need at this time is intelligent design in the classrooms.
To present intelligent design stunts their educational growth. It stunts their intellectual growth.
But what I don't understand is how these animals could have been on Earth millions of years before man. And the Bible says the whole Earth was created in only 6 days.
It wasn't just the educational aspects of intelligent design that had scientists concerned. Many suspected the movement masked a much larger agenda.
Intelligent design is a set of excuses to squeeze creationism into the classrooms.
Get intelligent design in the schools today, and we can have school prayers tomorrow.
Any other complaints?
Can you imagine anything more boring? The boredom attached to ID is supreme. It is so boring that I can't even bother to think about it much anymore. It's just utterly boring.
Love is in the air, everywhere I look around. Love is in the air, every sight and every sound.
Love was in the air, all right, but none of it was directed toward intelligent design. There seemed to be a lot to hate about ID, and nearly all of that hatred was focused on one place.
The people from the Discovery Institute, the people who are doing the intelligent design, they're all varnish and no product.
The Discovery Institute is a propaganda mill. It's an institution designed to suck in money from religious investors and turn it into a sanitized, somewhat secular version of the creation story to get it into the schools.
If they have a way of understanding nature that's superior to the one that we all are making lots of discoveries using, great. Bring it on.
We are really, really lost. I think it's on 3rd. I think it's on 3rd. I think it's down there. I have no idea where this place is. I guess I'll just keep walking. Do you have any idea where the Discovery Institute is? Have you ever heard of that?
Never heard of it.
Okay, thank you. How are you, sir?
I'm good, yourself?
Good. Do you have any idea where the Discovery Institute is?
Discovery Institute, not a clue. Discovery Institute.
Thank you. It's very kind of you to offer.
Welcome to Seattle.
Thank you, sir. It's got to be this whole building. Yes, where is the Discovery Institute, please?
Discovery Institute on the 8th floor, suite 808.
Okay, very good. Aha! Success at last. Aha! We found you. Are you Bruce Chapman?
I am.
How are you? I'm Ben Stein.
Well,
very kind of you to have me here.
Well, I'm delighted to meet you.
Can I look around and see your options?
Absolutely.
Do Do you just have this floor, or do you have several other floors as well?
No, this is it.
This is it? You've made an awful lot of trouble for being in such a small office. I thought it was going to be like the Pentagon.
We're like the little boy that said the emperor has no clothes. And he didn't have a big organization either.
When you go around and raise funds, your people are not saying to you, by the way, we're going to get all these scientists out of the classroom and put Christ back in the classroom.
Well, I don't know that Christ has ever been in the science classroom. This is not a religious argument. This is something that people, we have fellows who are Jewish or agnostic or various other things. There are people, there are Muslim scientists. There are people of all kinds of backgrounds who agree that Darwin's theory has failed. And so why would you bring religion into it? You don't need religion. This is a red herring, Ben. People who don't have an argument are reduced to throwing sand in your eyes.
Well, if the Discovery Institute could get its wish about this subject, what would your wish be?
Well, on this subject, as on others, we'd like people to be able to have a robust dialogue and even a debate where the evidence, the best evidence, in this case, the best scientific evidence is made available to people.
Well, surely no one questions there should be a debate.
Oh, yes, they do.
They do?
They say the debate has been settled.
Well,
that the issue's
when
settled.
was the debate settled?
Ben, I'd like you to talk to the scientists. You don't want to get your science from me.
Mr. Chapman claimed ID had nothing to do with religion. So why was my first stop Biola University, formerly known as the Bible Institute of Los Angeles?
Your own personal Jesus. Someone to hear your prayers, someone who cares.
Footnote in the history of science, the inference that Stonehenge was caused by intelligence.
Personal Jesus.
Remarkably stable in terms of all the knowledge.
Someone to hear your prayers, someone who's there.
How much money have you ever gotten from Jerry Falwell?
$0.
How about Pat Robertson?
0.
Are you a minister?
No.
Are you a priest?
No.
Pastor?
No.
Youth pastor?
Oh, I did teach Sunday school once.
Has this all been resolved? I mean, aren't we all Darwinists now? Except for a few cranks like you?
Well, it's a funny thing that questions that aren't properly answered don't go away. This question is loaded with all kinds of political baggage, but one-on-one at a scientific meeting after the third or fourth beer, my experience has been that many evolutionary biologists will say, yeah, this theory's got a lot of problems.
So you're meaning to tell me that there really is a debate among scientists about whether or not evolution occurred?
Well, evolution is a kind of funny word. It depends on how one defines it. If it means simply change over time, even the most rock-ribbed fundamentalist knows that the history of the Earth has changed, that there's been change over time. If you define evolution precisely, though, to mean the common descent of all life on Earth from a single ancestor via undirected mutation and natural selection, that's textbook definition of neo-Darwinism. Biologists of the first rank have real questions.
But the modern theory of intelligent design is just microwaved creationism.
I don't think that's the case. Creationism, properly understood, begins with the Bible and says, how can I fit the Bible into the data of science? Intelligent design doesn't do that. Intelligent design is the study of patterns in nature that are best explained as a result of intelligence.
So intelligent designers believe that God is the designer?
Not necessarily. Intelligent design is a minimal commitment scientifically to the possibility of detecting intelligent causation.
Dr. Nelson didn't sound like a crazy person, but I still suspected ID was nothing but reheated creationism. My next stop didn't seem like it was going to alleviate those fears.
I didn't crawl out of the ocean, I didn't come from no monkey. Science tends to forget evolution's just a theory. They present it in the textbooks and on animal TV. Like it's fact, but tell me, were you there 12 million BC?
evolution is, from an intelligent design perspective, is perfectly acceptable if the sense is that how did the design get implemented? The issue is there real design there, and are these material mechanisms like natural selection, are these adequate to account for everything we see in biology? And our argument is no, it's not.
But Darwin produced all this evidence from his travels and his studies at the Galapagos that evolution explained things.
If you look at the history of science, people often have a good idea and then they decide just to run with it. And they say, we're going to apply this everywhere. And so Darwin takes his idea of natural selection and says, I'm going to explain all of life with it. I mean, physics used to be Newtonian physics. Newton was physics. And then we got to look to Einstein, general relativity. It's not, Newton isn't enough. Well, I think likewise what we're finding with Darwin is that he had some valid insights, but it's not the whole picture.
Okay, Darwinism may not be the complete picture, but what made these guys think they had the missing pieces? I put this question to Dr. Stephen Meyer, author of the paper that originally got Dr. Sternberg in so much trouble. It's hard to believe that this little town is the headquarters of giant Microsoft. It's enabled Mr. Gates to become fantastically rich. Maybe that's what Steve Meyer's doing here. Maybe this is somehow going to make him fantastically rich. We'll pin him down like a butterfly on a butterfly board. Butterfly on a killing board. Coffee shop straight ahead. Newton is buried in the geniuses corner at Westminster Abbey, right?
That's correct, yeah. Darwin is also buried in Westminster Abbey.
Right, and so is Darwin. Right near each other, right? And you're here in Redmond in a little building without a sign. Right? And you're obviously an incredibly smart guy, but how dare you challenge someone who's buried in the geniuses corner next to Newton at Westminster Abbey?
Well, it may seem a little cheeky, but it's what scientists are supposed to do. When I was in Cambridge, one of my supervisors often advised us to beware the sound of one hand clapping, which was a way of saying if there's an argument on one side, there's bound to be an argument on the other. And what I found in studying the structure of the argument in The Origin of Species is that for every evidence-based argument for one of Darwin's two key propositions, there is an evidence-based counter-argument.
Well, but is it a debate? I mean, there's just you and a couple of other guys in a dinky little office downtown, say on one side, and there's the faculties of all the great universities of the world on the other side.
Speaking with a great uniform and authoritative voice.
Right.
Yeah. Well, in any case, the debate really isn't going to be settled by numbers. It's going to be settled by the evidence and the arguments.
While I was still in Bill Gates country, Dr. Meyer recommended I check in with molecular biologist Jonathan Wells. What kind of names do they call you?
Creationist.
What do you say back to them when they say you're a creationist?
Well, I usually don't get the opportunity.
What's at stake for you personally here?
First of all, I love science. I think the way Darwinism corrupts the evidence, distorts the evidence, is bad for science.
Well, the other scientists would tell you to just shut up if you love science, okay? Because you're sort of being a bomb thrower into science.
I am upsetting the apple cart, and I think it deserves to be upset in this case.
Why?
Because the evidence is being distorted to prop up a theory that I think doesn't fit it.
Was Darwinism really that bad? Perhaps a change of scenery would give me a fresh perspective.
Quand je t'ai vu au coin de la rue, tout est vide, j'ai cru que tous les deux, sous le ciel bleu, nous serions très heureux.
Mr. Berlinski, I assume? How are you, sir? So where are you from originally?
I was born in New York.
Yes.
Spent 31 years in Manhattan.
Yes.
And I spent a lot of time in California, too.
And tell me all the various universities where you've studied or taught.
No, I was at Princeton, then I had a professorship at Stanford, and then I left Stanford, and I taught at Rutgers. I left Rutgers, and I taught at the City College in New York. I left the City College of New York. I taught at the Baruch College. I taught at San Jose.
What did you teach at Baruch College?
Anything they wanted. Come on in.
Thank you, monsieur.
What an old building.
Wow.
It's the oldest in Paris.
You're kidding. Merci, monsieur.
Ah, je vous en prie, monsieur.
Merci. Wow, this is fabulous.
Let's put it this way. Before you can ask, is Darwinian theory correct or not, you have to ask the preliminary question, is it clear enough so that it could be correct? That's a very different question. One of my prevailing doctrines about Darwinian theory is, man, that thing is just a mess. It's like looking into a room full of smoke. Nothing in the theory is precisely, clearly, carefully defined or delineated. It lacks all of the rigor one expects from mathematical physics, and mathematical physics lacks all of the rigor one expects from mathematics. So we're talking about a gradual descent down the level of intelligibility until we reach evolutionary biology. We don't even know what a species is, for heaven's sakes.
So his theory is smoke, but elegant smoke.
There's a certain elegance to it, but you know, I think Einstein had the appropriate remark. He preferred to leave elegance to his tailor.
A room full of smoke? That certainly wasn't what I was hearing from prominent Darwinists like Richard Dawkins.
Evolution is a fact. It's a fact which is established as securely as essentially any other fact that we have in science.
Richard Dawkins is so confident that evolution is a fact, and that therefore God doesn't exist, that he has devoted his entire life to spreading the evolution gospel.
I'm an atheist with respect to the Judeo-Christian God because there is not a shred of evidence in favor of the Judeo-Christian God. It is completely right to say that since the evidence for evolution is so absolutely, totally overwhelming, nobody who looks at it could possibly doubt that if they were sane and not stupid. So the only remaining possibility is that they're ignorant, and most people who don't believe in evolution are indeed ignorant.
But the people I spoke with weren't ignorant. They were highly credentialed scientists. So there had to be something else going on here. So you think the whole theory of evolution is false, or just certain parts of it?
Well, again, evolution is a slippery word. I would say minor changes within species happen. But Darwin didn't write a book called how existing species change over time. He wrote a book called The Origin of Species. He purported to show how this same process leads to new species, in fact, every species. And the evidence for that grand claim is, in my opinion, almost totally lacking.
How does Darwin or Darwinism say life began?
Well, he didn't know, and in fact, nobody knows. So Darwinism, strictly defined, starts after the origin of life and deals only with living things.
Well, how can there be a theory about life without a theory about how life began?
Well, a grand overarching evolutionary story, of course, does include the origin of life, but Darwin's theory doesn't begin until you have the first cell.
Well, does someone have a theory about how life began?
This is the story of a small planet in space called Earth.
For a typical Darwinian explanation of how life originated, Dr. Wells directed me toward this documentary.
The chemical elements essential for life, hydrogen, oxygen, carbon, and nitrogen, were now in place. What was needed was a way of combining them. Perhaps the energy came from lightning. Whatever it was.
Excuse me?
Whatever it was, energy managed to arrange these chemical ingredients in just the right way.
Whatever it was? I was hoping for something a little more scientific. The most popular idea has been that life emerged spontaneously from primordial soup. In 1953, Stanley Miller mixed water, methane, ammonia, and hydrogen to simulate the early Earth's atmosphere. Then he ran electricity through it in an attempt to jumpstart life. It didn't work. While the initial results seemed promising, 50 years later, most serious scientists have abandoned this approach in favor of alternate theories. Prominent Darwinist Michael Roos attempted to explain one of them to me. He wasn't kidding. How did we get from an inorganic world to the world of the cell?
Well, one popular theory is that it might have started off on the backs of crystals.
My crystal ball.
Molecules piggybacked on the back of crystals forming, and that this led to more and more complex. But of course, the nice thing about crystals is every now and then you get mistakes. mutations, and that this opens the way for natural selection.
But at one point there was not a living thing, and then there was a living thing. How did that happen?
Well, this is I've just told you. And I don't see any reason why you shouldn't go from very simple to more and more complex to more and more complex.
I don't either, but I don't know how you get from mud to a living cell. That's my question.
Yes, well, I've told you.
I think it was on the back of crystals. On the backs of crystals.
On the backs of crystals is at least one hypothesis, yes.
So that's your theory, and you think that is more likely and less far-fetched than intelligent design?
I think it is.
I wouldn't put Ben Stein's money on Dr. Roos's joyriding crystals, but it did make me wonder, what were the chances of life arising on its own?
It's been speculated that probably there would have to be a minimum of about 250 proteins to provide a minimal life function. If that's really true, then I think it's almost inconceivable that life could have happened in some simple step-by-step way.
Okay, so the simplest form of life requires at least 250 proteins to function. What's so difficult about that?
Welcome to the Casino of Life. Who wants to spin for a chance to win?
Oh, sure. I'll give it a shot. What do I win?
Take a look at this.
Huh? How about the world's first single-cell organism? This perfectly aligned string of proteins could be yours.
Now, take a spin.
I
won! Tina, tell him how many times he needs to do that to win the prize.
250.
That's right, folks, and all in the correct order.
But that's impossible.
We've heard that before, haven't we, Richard?
Come on, Mother Nature, do your thing. You stupid machine! I hate you!
We're talking about something that's staggeringly improbable, roughly 1 in a trillion, 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 trillion.
Let all of life choose a million, a trillion, trillion. The number is essentially zero. Something has to skew nature to choose the ones that work.
So, in the game of life, it looks as if the house always wins. Luckily, some serious scientific minds have figured out a way to beat the odds.
Directed panspermia.
When faced with the overwhelming problem of the origin of life, Nobel Prize winner Francis Crick proposed this theory, that life was seeded on Earth, which basically means aliens did it. Crystals? Aliens? I thought we were talking about science, not science fiction.
We don't know what caused life to arise. Did it arise by a purely undirected process? Or did it arise by some kind of intelligent guidance or design? And the rules of science are being applied to actually foreclose one of the two possible answers to that very fundamental and basic and important question.
So the rules of science say we will consider any possibility except one that is guided.
Exactly.
No matter how life began, on the backs of crystals or in the test tube of some intelligent designer, everyone agrees it started with a single cell. But what is a cell? Let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
Darwin wrote The Origin of Species in 1859, published it in 1859. He had an idea of the cell as being quite simple, correct?
Yeah, everybody did.
Okay. If he thought of the cell as being a Buick, what is the cell now in terms of its complexity by comparison?
A galaxy.
If Darwin thought a cell was, say, a mud hut, what do we now know that a cell is?
More complicated than a Saturn V.
So what is in a cell as far as we know now?
A world that Darwin never could have imagined.
I needed someone who could give me a glimpse into this world. So we went to molecular biologist Doug Axe.
Think of a cell as being a nanofactory, a factory where on a very small scale, digital instructions are being used to make the components of the factory. Here we have the famous DNA double helix. You can see the two helical strands that are intertwined and wind around each other on the outside of the molecule. This is the material that stores all of our genetic information. In higher life forms, this will be the equivalent of something like a gigabyte of information stored in the molecules that form the individual chromosomes, all packed within the nucleus, which is a tiny fraction of the entire cell size. So what does DNA do? Well, the information in DNA ends up providing the information for sequencing the amino acids to make proteins. We have information in a one-dimensional form that provides the information for a three-dimensional form.
I'm finally just beginning to grasp the complexity of the cell. Are there systems within the cell that go well beyond Darwinian evolution? Some type of cellular technology that drives adaptation, replication, quality control, and repair? What if these new mechanisms have massive design implications? Well, I say, so be it.
The cell really is like nothing we've ever seen in the physical world. That's got to be firmly grasped. That's not something we can just say, oh, well, it's just a little bit more of the same old, same old. It's not the same old, same old.
We are finding is that there's information that's in the cell that cannot be accounted for in terms of these undirected material causes. So
it has to be.
And so there's some other, so it has to be an information source.
So one of the key questions faced by modern biology is, where do you get information from?
Well, Darwin assumed that the increase in information comes from natural selection. But natural selection reduces genetic information, and we know this from all the genetic population studies that we have.
And where does the new genetic information going to come from?
Well, that's the big question.
So when we find information in the DNA molecule, the most likely explanation is that it too had an intelligent source.
I mean, we need engineering principles to understand these systems, okay? I mean, it's only because of our advancements in nanotechnology that we can even begin to appreciate these systems.
But using intelligent design didn't seem to stop the scientists I spoke with, so why all the controversy?
Suppose we find, simply as a matter of fact, that our scientific inquiries point in one direction.
Which is that there is an intelligent creator.
Why should we eliminate that from discussion? Streng verboten? How come? Why?
Streng verboten. Very good. What does streng verboten mean? Strongly forbidden.
Strongly forbidden.
You've got two possible hypotheses. You've got a wall through the middle of through your brain, in effect, through your thinking. You say, well, you can't consider anything on this side of the wall. Only hypotheses on this side of the wall are permissible for consideration.
What about academic freedom? I mean, can't we just talk about this?
Their reply is that science is not a democratic process.
Oh, really?
And that there is a consensus view.
But wait a minute,
we are to subscribe to the
wait a second,
view.
but Darwin challenged the consensus view, and that's how we got Darwinism. If Darwin wanted to challenge the consensus today, how would he do it? Science isn't a hobby for rich aristocrats anymore. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And if you want a piece of the pie, you've got to be a good comrade.
Scientific ideas. How we get them to you, the people. Every idea must be inspected to ensure that it is safe. All theories must pass through a series of checkpoints. First, the Academy.
Getting a controversial theory through the academy can be dangerous. Few people know this better than Congressman Mark Souder. He uncovered a targeted campaign led by individuals within the Smithsonian and the National Center for Science Education to destroy Dr. Sternberg's credibility.
If you want peer reviews, if you want to be published, if you want to go to respected institutions, the core view does not tolerate dissent. There's kind of a, this is the way it is, and anybody who's a dissenter should be squashed.
Are you going to be on my side if I let you up?
Sure, Tick, sure. I'm on your side. Just let me up. I'll do anything you say.
Souder isn't the only one who has witnessed the Academy's tactics. Journalist Larry Witham has seen similar behavior during his 25 years of covering the evolution controversy.
Once you're thick in science, you can't question the paradigm. But if you want to get grants, if you want to be elected to high positions, if you want to get awards as a promoter of public education of science, you can't question the paradigm.
People cannot be trusted to form their own opinions. This business about open-mindedness is nonsense.
Why is the scientific establishment so afraid of free speech?
There is this fear that if one aspect of the theory is closely scrutinized, there's going to be an unraveling.
Who are you?
Oh, I am the great and powerful Wizard of Oz.
I interviewed dozens and dozens of scientists, and when they're amongst each other or talking to a journalist who they trust, they'll speak about, it's incredibly complex, or molecular biology is in a crisis. But publicly, they can't say that.
Keeping a keen eye on the Academy, our various watchdog organizations.
Listen to Eugenie Scott of the National Center for Science Education. The NCSE has been at the heart of virtually every evolution controversy over the past 25 years, vigorously defending the Darwinian gospel.
We have had a lot of business, unfortunately, at NCSE in the last few years, because virtually every state in which science education standards has come up for consideration has had a big fight about the coverage of evolution in them. NCSE was started by a group of scientists and teachers who were very concerned because in the late 70s and early 80s there were a lot of attempts to pass equal time for creation science and evolution laws. And clearly this is something that neither scientists nor teachers liked. It wasn't exactly help the creationists are coming, but it's kind of along those lines. Most scientists just throw up their hands and say, creationists, they drive me crazy, you handle it. We've worked a lot with science education organizations. The most important group we work with is members of the faith community, because the best kept secret in this controversy is that Catholics and mainstream Protestants are okay on evolution.
Are you sure about that, Eugenie?
Liberal Christians have been fighting with conservative Christians for so long that they'll side with anybody against the fundamentalists. And Eugenie Scott says, well, welcome over.
There's a kind of science defense lobby, or an evolution defense lobby in particular. They are mostly atheists, but they are desperately wanting to be friendly to mainstream, sensible religious people. And the way you do that is to tell them that there's no incompatibility between science and religion.
But is there really an incompatibility? Can't we believe in God and Darwin?
Implicit in most evolutionary theory is that either there's no God or God can't have any role in it. So naturally, as many evolutionists will say, it's the strongest engine for atheism.
If they called me as a witness, and a lawyer said, Dr. Dawkins, has your belief in evolution, has your study of evolution turned you towards atheism? I would have to say yes. And that's the worst possible thing I could say for winning that court case. So people like me are bad news for the science lobby, the evolution lobby. By the way, I'm being a hell of a lot more frank and honest in this interview than many people in this field would be.
Working hard to keep ideas in check are our friends in the media.
Morning, paper. Paper, mister?
The tendency of the media is to side with the establishment because they inherently agree with the establishment.
Eugenie Scott, my understanding is that there is not a single peer-reviewed article out there
that supports intelligent design. Am I wrong?
You are not wrong. You are correct.
I believe that we get coverage, but we always get coverage like we're the outsider, not like it's an even debate.
But instead of merely reporting news, he analyzes it, often expressing his personal opinions.
We constantly deal with reporters who refuse even to report the correct definition of intelligent design. They, over and over again, talk about life is so complex, God must have done it.
Just admit it, it's religion.
Very simple.
You just can't, it's religion.
It's a wanton distortion of our position.
Study desk.
I've got a hot story here.
You can look at Associated Press stories, and the same sentence will appear in those stories for 10 years. Intelligent design says that life is too complex. It's called a boilerplate. And the reporter never reports anymore or gets any new ways to say it, so the public understanding never advances.
But what happens if a reporter decides to take a more balanced approach to intelligent design?
There might be remarkable pressure on that reporter not to side against the evolutionists.
I thought I told you to kill that story.
Few reporters have learned this better than author and journalist Pamela Winnick. When she refused to take sides in an article she wrote about intelligent design, the Darwinists found a new favorite target.
Number one, I wasn't Christian, I was Jewish. Number two, I wasn't religious. Number three, I was not taking a position in favor of creationism. I was writing about intelligent design, and it didn't matter. After I wrote that one piece, everything I wrote on the subject was scrutinized. There were hate letters coming into the newspaper. If you give any credence to it whatsoever, which means just writing about it, you are just finished as a journalist.
Other journalists we spoke with told similar stories, but didn't dare appear on camera.
And now, the presses are ready to roll.
When all other checkpoints fail, there is always the courts.
We have spent an enormous amount of time trying to prove to the court what everybody already knows, that intelligent design is a particular religious belief.
But I thought scientific questions were settled by the evidence, not by taking people to court and suing them. How do other countries deal with such disputes? Dr. Marcy Giertuk, a population geneticist who now represents Poland in the European Parliament, was able to shed some light on this topic.
The censorship of teaching criticism of evolution is and always was much stronger in, say, in your country, in the United States, than it ever was in Poland.
Why? Why would the censorship?
That is because you have a political correctness in your country. These issues are brought to court, and the court says what you can and what you cannot teach.
We want to know what you teach, what books you use, how you teach it.
We never had that sort of way of deciding scientific issues in Poland. We never had the courts involved.
So you are saying that as far as the teaching of science is concerned, Poland is freer academically than the United States?
I think in this particular issue of evolution, I think this is true.
But how effective are the courts in deciding such matters? What about the general idea that intelligent design is doomed as a result of several recent legal setbacks?
I think court cases don't decide anything. I mean, if you look at the Scopes trial, who won that trial? It wasn't the evolutionists. I mean, it was the Tennessee law was upheld, barring evolution. And yet, in the popular imagination, Scopes is the hero. Inherit the Wind, that movie, which is really bogus history based on the Scopes trial, has carried the day. These issues go much deeper than any decision by a judge.
The evolution debate does seem to run much deeper than the courts, much deeper even than science. To generate this level of hostility, ID must threaten something at the very core of the Darwinian establishment.
The entire globe is today the site of a momentous conflict. It is the challenge of ideas.
I am Edward R. Murrow. For a little while, I would like to review with you the great conflict of our times, one which demands and must get the attention and the involvement of each one of us.
This conflict over the
principles of evolution has become a religious war. It really is no longer about scientific investigation.
It is total competition with an antagonist who is putting into it everything within his capability.
The situation has reached a point where many of evolution's top apologists have switched from defending Darwinism to attacking religion in what they see as a bid to stamp out intelligent design at the source. Richard Dawkins is the best example of this. His recent book, The God Delusion, has sold over 1 million copies worldwide.
The God Delusion is my long-expected, long-worked-on, full-frontal attack on religion. To me, science is about trying to explain existence, and religion is about trying to explain existence. It's just that religion gets the wrong answer.
But is Dawkins correct? Are science and religion really at war?
For an appraisal of this continuing and protracted conflict, we can go to a reporter who has watched the growing conflict with the perception of a trained military observer.
Oxford professor Alistair McGrath, author of The Dawkins Delusion, seemed like the ideal person to answer my question.
Richard Dawkins has a charming and very, I think, interesting view of the relationship between science and religion. They're at war with each other, and in the end, one's got to win, and it's going to be science. It's a very naive view. It's based on a complete historical misrepresentation of the way science and religion have interacted. Dawkins seems to think that a scientific description is an anti-religious argument. Describing how something happens scientifically somehow explains it away. It doesn't. But the questions of purpose, intentionality, the question why, still remain there on the table.
And I think it was just a catastrophic mistake to have someone like Dawkins address himself to profound issues of theology, the existence of God, the nature of life. He hasn't committed himself to disciplined study in any relevant area of inquiry. He's a crummy philosopher. He doesn't have the rudimentary skills to meticulously assess his own arguments.
Genius guy, though.
Very smart guy. A little bit of a reptile, but a very smart guy.
The opposing point of view in this conflict rests on a fundamentally different vision of man.
If you have two distinguished scientists, and in fact you can range many more on each side, as you know, saying exactly opposite things, that's telling me that the conflict is not between science and belief in God. Otherwise, you'd expect all scientists to be atheists. But it's a worldview conflict. It's between scientists who have different worldviews.
You've got two competing explanations of the evidence. One says design, one says undirected processes. Both of them have larger philosophical or religious or anti-religious implications. So you can't say that one of those two theories is scientific and the other is unscientific simply because they have implications. Both have implications.
People who tell you, for example, that science tells you all you need to know about the world, or that science tells you that religion is all wrong, or science tells you there is no God, those people aren't telling you scientific things. They are saying metaphysical things, and they have to defend their positions for metaphysical reasons.
What is being presented to the public is, first comes the science, and then comes the worldview. I would want to argue that that may not be the case, that it may actually be the other way around, that the worldview comes first and is influencing the interpretation of science.
My deep regret is some people are so deeply entrenched in their own worldviews that they will simply not countenance alternatives.
I'm actually a person of the left. I'm not even a particularly religious person. I think of myself as kind of humanist. And I think it's sending a very bad message to religious people who are interested in science, that in some sense, in order to do science credibly, they have to leave their religious beliefs at the door.
The founders of early modern science, Sir Isaac Newton, Robert Boyle, Johannes Kepler, Galileo, most of these early scientists all not only believed in God, but they thought their belief in God actually made it easier to do science.
You can be religiously motivated and you can do good science. And they have more often gone together than not gone together.
Admitting our biases is the best way towards rational discussion, which I would welcome.
Rational debate is a nice thought, but it's nearly impossible in the current climate. I'd seen the chilling effect that this unquestioning devotion to Darwinism has had on science, but were there other consequences?
No gods, no life after death.
no ultimate foundation for ethics, no ultimate meaning in life, and no human free will are all deeply connected to an evolutionary perspective. You're here today and you're gone tomorrow, and that's all there is to it.
Dr. Will Provine, professor of the history of biology at Cornell University, gave us another disturbing glimpse into where Darwinism can lead.
Oh, I was a Christian, but I never heard anything about evolution because it was illegal to teach it in Tennessee.
Dr. Provine's first biology professor changed all that.
He started talking about evolution as if it had no design in it whatsoever. And I came up to him and I said, "You've left out the most important part." And he said, "If you feel the same way at the end of one quarter, I want you to stand up in front of the students in this class and tell them this deep lack in evolution." And I read that book so carefully, and I could find no sign of there being any design whatsoever in evolution. And I immediately began to doubt the existence of a deity. But it starts by giving up an active deity. Then it gives up the hope that there's any life after death. When you give those two up, the rest of it follows fairly easily. You give up the hope that there's an immanent morality. And finally, there's no human free will. If you believe in evolution, you can't hope for there being any free will. There's no hope whatsoever of there being any deep meaning in human life. We live, we die, and we're gone. We're absolutely gone when we die.
Dr. Provine is no stranger to the prospect of death. Nearly a decade ago, he was diagnosed with a large brain tumor.
Let's suppose my tumor comes back, as it almost certainly will. Well, I'm not going to sit around like my older brother did last year, and he was dying of ALS, Lou Gehrig's disease. He wanted desperately to die, but we couldn't help him die. I don't want to die like that. I'm going to shoot myself in the head long before then. I'm going to do something different.
I hope these are empty words for my friend, Dr. Provine, because shortly after this interview was recorded, he learned his brain tumor had returned.
I don't feel one bit bad about holding the views that I do. There's not anything in the views I hold that makes me, oh, I wish I had free will, or, oh, I wish there were a God. I don't ever wish that.
Dr. Provine's deconversion story was typical amongst the Darwinists we interviewed. Biologist P.Z. Myers, who runs the pro-Darwin, anti-religion blog Pharyngula, says science eroded his faith as well.
I never hated religion. I found religion quite comfortable, and I liked the people in it. What led to the atheism was learning more about science, learning more about the natural world, and seeing these horrible conflicts with religion.
And it was then, when I discovered evolution, when I discovered Darwinism, that I realized there's this magnificently elegant, stunningly elegant explanation, which I didn't quite understand to begin with. When I did understand it, then that finally killed off my remaining religious faith.
After hearing these stories, I was not surprised to discover that most evolutionary biologists share Professor Dawkins' views. It appears Darwinism does lead to atheism, despite what Eugenie Scott would have us believe.
And if you separate out the ethical message from religion, what have you got left? You got a bunch of fairy tales, right?
I think that God is about as unlikely as fairies, angels, hobgoblins, etc.
Religion, I mean, it's just fantasy, basically. It's completely empty of any explanatory content. And it's evil as well.
Half the people in this country think that drugs is what you have to regulate to make us safer, and half the people think guns, that's what you got to regulate to make us safer. But I always think if you're going to regulate one thing that has the most potential to cause death and destruction, religion. You got to start with religion, and
Religion is an idea that gives some people comfort, and we don't want to take it away from them. It's like knitting. People like to knit. we're not going to take their knitting needles away. We're not going to take away their churches. But what we have to do is get it to a place where religion is treated at the level it should be treated. That is, something fun that people get together and do on the weekend and really doesn't affect their life as much as it has been so far.
So, what would the world look like if Dr. Myers got his wish?
Greater science literacy, which is going to lead to the erosion of religion. And then we'll get this nice positive feedback mechanism going, where as religion slowly fades away, we get more and more science to replace it. And that will displace more and more religion, which will allow more and more science in. And we'll eventually get to that point where religion has taken that appropriate place as a side dish rather than the main course.
Right. Bye. I'm gonna hit the lights. Unfortunately, we can't watch this whole thing because it's super long. Am I talk? Yeah, okay.
Is that available on YouTube? Or?
It's on the website. Yeah, so I put the link on the website. All right, so what was the main point? What yeah.
The argument between people who say that intelligent design should be like included into science, and scientists who say that intelligent design is religion.
Yeah. So basically, obviously there's a conflict. Is the fight fair? So what is it about it that's kind of unfair?
They're having the fight, but not allowing the other person to even get in the ring with them.
Pretty much, yeah. So when you talk about, anything regarding an academic institution, the higher levels of learning involve research. They involve you having a thesis and you having to defend your thesis, and there are gatekeepers of knowledge in our society. They exist at the academic institutions, they exist in the media, and they exist in the courts. And that whole video was to the whole purpose of this is to show that the fight isn't fair. It's not represented properly in the media. It's not, you get people like Richard Sternberg, that was a huge thing, where he published a peer-reviewed journal in an academic journal. He published one of Stephen Myers' journals that was peer-reviewed, and simply for putting the argument on the table, he was fired. You get people, scientists who are denied tenure, scientists who are denied research funding, or their research is shut down and they're demanded to return their funds. This is the way it's handled. And even more so, there's even more fundamental to that. There was something that was said right around the time. It was something John Lennox said. John Lennox said that you think that the science comes first and then the worldview secondary. And he said, I would like to argue that it's actually that the worldview comes first, and it allows the type of explanations that you're going to let in when you do your scientific inquiry. And that is, if you can understand that, you will understand today's lesson, and that's primarily the point I want you to get across when you make your videos. Okay? So hopefully you get that it's not that people think, so what John Lennox said is that people think that it's the science comes first and then the worldview. When in reality it's the worldview that comes first, and the worldview determines what science is allowed when it comes to the issue of naturalism and intelligent design in the academic institutions. probably a good time to take some notes on what I just said or summarize that. I could say it again. John Lennox basically said that it's not that the science comes first and then the worldview. It's that the worldview comes first, and the worldview of these materialists prevents the kind of conclusions that would be made given the scientific inquiry. So that's the main point that I want you to get across. Okay, so this lecture is entitled Naturalism, Natural Theology. So again, the purpose of this lecture is to demonstrate that there does exist this philosophical wall, the Berlin Wall that they talked about, which prevents any evidence invoking non-naturalistic causes for the origin of life from being considered by the scientific community. So you want to show that the wall is there and try to show that there's no need for this wall. And your first slide, I want you to define scientific method, metaphysical naturalism, and methodological naturalism, and scientism. So these are all vocabulary words you should just be aware of because people use these terms all the time, and you should just know, you should know what naturalism, and know that there's different kinds of naturalism. You should know what scientism is. You should know what the scientific method is, and know where they're distinct. Because when we use science, a lot of times that word science could be referring to the scientific method, or it could be just inferring that science is methodological naturalism, that they're woven in, it's part of the definition, the very definition of science. And I would say that that's false. And that's the false assumption that's preventing the people from even allowing consideration of evidence that would be contrary to naturalism, because it's woven into the very definition of science itself. So scientific method is that basically it's what you learn in 7th grade. I know because I teach in 7th and 8th grade. The whole idea of there being, you make observations, you have a hypothesis, you do experimentations that either validate or disprove your hypothesis, and you develop a theory or a law, and that's how science works. And there's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing inherently against religion. So the way that this issue is framed in the media is it's religion versus science. But there's nothing inherent about any thing that we believe that would be contrary to science as a methodology. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, what is at conflict is not between science and religion, but between religion or Christianity, which I would call a religion. Some people don't like that word. I don't want to get sidetracked on why Christianity is a religion, but it is a religion. The issue is between religion and naturalism. The issue is between religion and naturalism. And it's that naturalism has been woven into the very definition of science. But it's not science. It's a philosophical assumption. Okay? So there's metaphysical naturalism and methodological naturalism. So metaphysics is the study of what is. So metaphysical naturalism is a view about reality which states that the material world is all that exists. Only things that can be empirically verified are real. It denies the existence of the supernatural or anything beyond the physical world. So remember how I talked about in epistemology you have two extremes? You have rationalism and empiricism. Metaphysical naturalism would be the strongest form of, well, both methodological and metaphysical naturalism, they go together, it's an extreme form of empiricism, where the only source of knowledge, the only thing that can exist is the material world, and the only way you can know anything that's real is through your senses, through the 5 senses, your empirical verification. That's what that's what the word empirical means. It's through the senses. Touch, taste, hear, smell, see. Touch, taste, hear, smell, see. Yeah. So methodological naturalism, it has to do with the methodology of knowledge, the epistemological assumptions when you learn things. And so if you believe that the only thing that is real is the material world, if you start with that assumption, then the only valid way of knowing is through the 5 senses. So a methodology for doing science that limits valid explanations to material processes only. And it forbids the experimenter from invoking a non-naturalistic cause. It says if you want to be scientific, you must infer natural causes. And this view was adopted by the mainstream science. And for the naturalists, this is woven into the very definition of science, as I said. So scientism. So guys, these first slide is like at the heart of the controversy. Like this is the main issue. Is this issue that naturalism is woven into the very definition of science, and therefore, if you accept naturalism as one with science, then religion is inherently at conflict with naturalism, which is science. So if you assume that naturalism is science, that they're woven into the very definition, you have a conflict between religion and science. But once you've taken apart this interwoven mess of confusion and shown that there's science as a methodology and naturalism as an arbitrarily imposed philosophical assumption, then there's no conflict between science and religion. That's how you unpack this confused thing. So scientism is basically the epistemological stance that science is the only test for truth. Statements that cannot be empirically verified are meaningless. And again, empirical verification through the 5 senses. Scientism is the most extreme form of empiricism. Other terms that are used, you should just be aware of these terms. Some people call it logical positivism or verificationism or reductionism. And I say it's self-refuting. Why would it be self-refuting to say science is the only way that you could know anything?
How do you know that?
Through...
How do you know that science is
Can you use science to prove that statement? No. Right? It's a philosophical assertion, right? So it's self-refuting. You can't. You guys get it?
I don't know if we're gonna go over it later, but isn't there like a law of empirical verifiability or something like that?
Well, I mean, yeah, I'm not the vocabulary. I'm not really sure what you're talking about, but you basically empirical verification is the way that we discover the external world, right?
Yeah.
Right. But if we start with the assumption that only the external world is real, then the only valid form of knowledge is through the 5 senses.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And again, this in the continuum of epistemology, this is radical empiricism. Radical empiricism, which is now kind of the status quo among scientists. Not so much among philosophers, but among scientists. Yeah. So, okay. Define natural theology. And then I say to quote Romans, or Romans 1 or Psalm 19. So natural theology is basically the knowledge of God. So theology is the knowledge of God. That's what theology is. Natural theology is theology derived from natural revelation. Does anybody know the difference between natural revelation and special revelation? We talked about it. It's in probably one of your former notes, probably one of the first days. Natural revelation versus special revelation.
That natural revelation is something that you can just...
What is revelation?
Something that's revealed.
Yeah, where God reveals himself, right? How does God reveal himself?
Through nature.
Through nature? And how else? Through his word, right? So through his word, that's a special revelation. It's given to, specific people who have his word, right? And who have the Holy Spirit illuminating that word and revealing himself to the believers through the Holy Spirit and his guidance in their lives through their reading of the Scripture, right? Okay? Any miraculous revelation of God, it would be considered special revelation, right? General revelation or natural revelation. It's called general revelation because it's to all men, right? So natural theology is knowledge of God through general revelation. Does that make sense? Through revelation that's basically through an examination of the world. And basically, I'll just quote Romans 1. It says, since the creation of the world, his invisible attributes are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made, even his eternal power and Godhead, so that they are without excuse. This natural theology is the opposite of naturalism. They're polar opposites. Naturalism says only the physical world is real. Natural theology says, naturalism says only the physical world is real and only inferences that invoke natural physical causes are valid. Whereas natural theology says that there is a being beyond there are beings beyond the physical world, including us. We exist, part of what we are, our soul exists beyond the natural world. God exists beyond the natural world. Angels exist beyond the natural world. And knowledge of God can be obtained through the observation of the physical world. That's what Paul means here in Romans 1. It says, the invisible attributes of him are clearly seen, being understood by the things that are made. If you observe the things that are made, it points to the invisible things of God, even his eternal power and divine nature, so that they're without excuse. Actually, if you read the whole passage, it's the wrath of God that's revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men. So it's not just the existence of God, it's God's judgment, and that we're all guilty and culpable before God. That's revealed to all people. Everybody knows this. But it goes on to the passage to say they suppress that truth in their unrighteousness. For that which may be known of God is manifested in them, for God has shown it to them. And so Psalm 19 says, the heavens declare the glory of God, and the firmament, meaning the skies, shows his handiwork. Day unto day utters speech, night unto night reveals knowledge. There is no speech nor language where their voice is not heard. The voice of the heavens. So, next slide. So you want to kind of draw that polar opposite between naturalism and natural theology. These are completely opposite worldviews. ways of approaching science, because naturalism and natural theology are both doing science. They're just coming at it with completely opposite philosophical assumptions about what their scientific inquiry is going to lead them to, right? So that's really the debate. It's not science versus religion, it's natural theology versus naturalism. That's where the debate lies. And so, okay, so define intelligent design and creationism. Explain the difference between intelligent design and creation. Don't let me catch you guys confusing these two topics. It's one of the most irritating things that I I encounter when people blend the two things. Intelligent design and creationism are two entirely different things. They start with different premises and they come to different conclusions. So intelligent design is basically a theory that says the effects of conscious activity can be detected scientifically. That design can be empirically verified. That I can look at something and say, this was designed. How do I know? Well, there are some things within, there's design reasoning that we use, and this isn't just an assumption, there's actual philosophical reasoning that goes into my conclusions. When I go out and I see John loves Mary written in the sand, there's an actual scientific basis for me, a philosophical basis that is rooted in empiricism. It's something that I can empirically verify. That every time I see these particular features, it's always the product of an intelligent design. Anytime I see information, complex, specified information, it's always the product of intelligence. This is true everywhere I go, in every experiment I ever do. It's empirically verified. Okay? That's what intelligent design tries to say. That there are features that trigger the awareness of design, and you can go and test that empirically. Over and over and over again, you will always get the same result. Anytime you see these particular features, it's always the product of intelligence. Okay? Creationism starts, it is an attempt to harmonize the Bible with science. So it starts with the Bible as a source document, and then it attempts to find the empirical justification through doing science. Okay, so you're starting with the Bible said this happened, here's the science to back it up. Very different than saying, look, there are features that trigger the awareness of design. These features are found in nature. Therefore, I'm coming to the conclusion that the product is not, this thing is not the product of undirected natural forces. It was the product of a mind. Okay? You see the difference? One starts with the Bible and tries to prove it. The other starts with a theory that says, hey, if you have these features, which we'll talk about those features, I'll spend a whole day on it. If these conditions exist, it must be the product of a mind. Okay? Two different things. Okay. Creationism claims, so another thing is creationism often implies young earth creationism. So usually when someone says they're a creationist, they're usually identifying themselves, usually they're a young earth creationist. Not always, but typically the term implies young earth creationism. The difference between the two, again, creationism claims to know the identity of the designer, whereas intelligent design, being a more modest position, does not make the claim. Yes? Well, the difference would be that, an old Earth creationist would believe that the universe is billions of years old, and a young Earth creationist would say that the Earth is no more than about 10,000, 15,000 years old. And it would take the the young Earth creationists would take the 6 days of creation literally, whereas the old Earth creationists may believe them to be ages or eras, or that there's a gap between the first and the second day of creation. There's a lot of different theories about, why that might be. So,
will we talk more about that?
I'm not going to really kind of go into that, because I'm more agnostic on that particular subject. I've changed my opinion so many times that I can defend both sides, and I tend to lean more towards an old Earth creationist. But when I start talking to Jim No, he, right. So I like to leave it off the table, because personally I feel the issue distracts from what's really important, and that's this issue of intelligent design, because intelligent design is so it's the weak, when you talk about the whole naturalistic worldview, there's chains in order to be a naturalist, you got to believe certain things. You want to focus on the weak links in destroying that argument, rather than trying to I don't know. I mean, it's not an essential doctrine. You always want to focus on what's core to your belief, and the age of the Earth is not core to your belief. And that one thing that does frustrate me a lot about young Earth creationists is they tend to make it a core belief. If you don't believe exactly like them, then you're a heretic or a cult leader, and you don't take the Bible seriously. And again, going back to the really, we covered it the second day, those 6 essentials, those 6 pillars of the faith. That's the main thing we want to be covering. We want to be liberal in the non-essentials, but very, very firm in our belief of the essentials. Right? I think Augustine said, in non-essentials, liberty; in essentials, unity; in essentials, unity; in non-essentials, liberty; and in all things, charity. And I think that that's really the attitude we got to have when we approach this particular issue. Yeah. So I do focus way more on this issue of intelligent design, because I think that's really the core issue, and it's the issue that nobody understands. It's the most important issue, and nobody understands it. Christians and non-Christians. People have no idea what they're talking about when they talk about intelligent design. Probably 99 out of 100 people I talk to have no clue about intelligent design. When you really get into the nuts and bolts about it, it's just, no idea what we're talking about. Even intelligent people who are, knowledgeable about science. I have I'm not like super duper science background, but I was in the nursing program, so I have taken anatomy, physiology, microbiology, pathophysiology. So I know a thing or two about the cells and how the cell and how the cell works and how biology works, and I can talk meaningfully about it. But when you talk to people who know a whole lot more about me, they really are ignorant when it comes to this subject. Because really, when you look at the gatekeepers, it all goes back to this video, that the gatekeepers of knowledge in our society have taken this so that it's not even on the table. And so if it's not on the table, nobody even knows the arguments for or against it. They just assume it's stupid, that it's religious superstition, right? And so that's kind of the main core of what we're trying to get at with this video, is to show that hey, we got to treat this subject fairly. If we're going to be intellectually honest, we got to treat it appropriately and not confuse our terms, and mischaracterize science and mischaracterize naturalism as science and mischaracterize intelligent design as creationism. They're separate things, Okay, and whenever this subject, I can't even watch a media. This is one of those things that, like, if the media, if there's a story in the news, I can't even watch it. I'll throw something at the television. You know, I just, you know, it's frustrating. So yeah, so this, I'm real strong on this intelligent design. I wish I had 2 or 3 days to talk about intelligent design because it's such an important topic. But this goes not just for intelligent design. It goes for, you know, the origin of the universe, the fine-tuning of the universe. The natural theology is more than just intelligent design, but intelligent design is an important part of it. So anyways, creationism is inherently religious. Does that make sense? Because it starts with the Bible and says, hey, you know, we're starting with the Bible, and we're using science to prove the Bible. That's what creationism does. Whereas an intelligent design person, an agnostic could be in favor of intelligent design, right? He could say, I recognize that there's some kind of designer, but I have no idea whether it's God. I mean, wouldn't aliens be considered intelligent design? I mean, they're intelligent, and they're designing things. You know, maybe aliens created us. That would be an example of intelligent design, right? So intelligent design, doesn't make any inferences really about God, although there are implications, particularly when you start talking about the fine-tuning of the universe as design. That seems strongly to point towards a cosmic designer. But again, the implications are not part of the premises. That's the conclusion. The premises is based entirely on scientific premises. If these sets of conditions exist, they're always the product of intelligent design. You can go out and test it over and over, empirically test it, prove it. It's always true. And we'll talk about it. But it's important to get the two distinct, because creationism is inherently religious. Intelligent design is not. It's different. It's based on scientific principles. It has nothing to do with religion, really, at its premises. It may lead to metaphysical conclusions, but it's not based on religious premises, unlike creationism. You have to get those two separate. So next slide is explain the difference between the scientific method, methodological naturalism. Emphasizes that they are not the same thing. We kind of already did this. I kind of already explained it. But again, the scientific methodology is a methodology for discovering the truth about the world. It's what we use when we do science, actual nuts and bolts science. We're making hypotheses. We're testing them with experiments and, you know, our observations, and we're drawing conclusions we're either validating or invalidating the hypotheses. And we develop theories and laws based on this method. And it's a good method, right? Methodological naturalism is a philosophical, again, methodological naturalism has to do with philosophy. We're starting with a philosophical assumption that limits the conclusions one can draw from their observations. So basically you're saying if you want to do science, you have to make inferences to natural causes. No non-naturalistic causes are valid. Once you make a non-naturalistic cause, you are now doing religion. Once you are invoking a non-naturalistic cause, you are doing religion, not science. That's the claim. Okay, but really, that's a philosophical assumption about science. It's not science. Science is the methodology. You guys get where I'm coming from? Okay, so next one. Discuss the potential problem with naturalism artificially ruling out the possibility of design before the evidence has a chance to speak. So, think about it. If we say that only naturalistic explanations are valid, we're just arbitrarily assuming a philosophical assumption that reduces the number of possible explanations. If you listen to Greg Kokel's lecture, he talked about it like, okay, so there's this crime scene. I want you to go out and gather all the evidence that you can and come to conclusions, but you cannot implicate a white man. Why? Why are you limiting yourself that way? It's just an arbitrary philosophical assumption that limits the possibility for the potential of a designer. So it says, we need to look at the evidence before we rule out possible explanations. And that's really a matter of intellectual honesty. So the argument for methodological naturalism, so there's reasons why people believe it. It's not entirely arbitrary. The first argument is that is beyond the realm of, I call this the beyond the realm of science argument. So science deals with empirical inquiry. And if God is immaterial, then we cannot empirically verify God's existence. And the God question lies beyond the realm of science. That's actually true. You can't empirically verify God. Right? Can you take God and put him in a test tube and do experiments like you can do on a dead shark and see how the shark works by looking at, its organs and testing it and watching its reproductive systems and how its eyeballs work and its brain and how it responds to stimuli and all that? Can you do that with God? No, because God is beyond empirical. He's beyond the empirical realm, so we can't do science on God, right? So there's some validity there, right? But you got to unpack this, because while it is true that God's existence could never be empirically verified because God is immaterial, science can verify premises to philosophical arguments that lead to the conclusion that God exists. Okay, you gotta make sure that, because people will throw that one at you, especially when you start talking in the academic realm. This is just common language when you start talking to any professor at a major institution or even at a city college. They're going to say that this is beyond the realm of science, so it doesn't belong. And so because God is beyond the realm of science, he doesn't belong in the science classroom. This issue is a religious issue, and we shouldn't talk about it in science. Right? So we say no. Yes, it's true, God can never be empirically verified, but science can verify premises to philosophical arguments which lead to conclusions that God exists. Second response is that intelligent design can be empirically verified by testing the theory on the effects of human intelligence. So when you start talking about intelligent design, again, there are features that are true of things that are designed. God isn't the only designer. We're designers. Somebody designed that cup, right? There are features about this cup that indicate that it was designed. There is language here. Right? These languages are made of characters. The characters have meaning if they're set in a certain order. And that meaning was predetermined, independent of the cup. So I go out elsewhere and I see these words and these letters, they have the same meaning independent of the cup, and therefore I know that the cup's source is not the product of undirected natural sources. The same thing is true when you look at DNA. And we'll talk more about that at a later time. So intelligent design can be empirically verified. You can go out and test it. Argument 2, God of the gaps. So this is a common one that you will hear when you start talking to atheists, is this claim. So the naturalist is going to make this point. Traditionally, the supernatural has been used to make sense of unexplainable phenomena, such as lightning, earthquakes, diseases, mental illness. Lightning goes up, that's Thor, right? Or sickness comes along, and God set a plague. The earth shake, God's shaking the earth, And now we find that there are natural causes. So God has been used to fill the gaps of our knowledge. And since the dawn of the scientific revolution, those gaps have consistently been filled with naturalistic explanations. So we don't know what's going on, so therefore we say God did it. And as science moves along, all of the God did it's are being erased by naturalistic explanations. Okay? And so we have come to the point where most of these gaps have been filled. A few questions remain. And if you get an honest person, they will talk about the origin of life being really uncertain, or the fine-tuning of the universe being a question mark, or being where consciousness resides in the brain. That's another question mark that science has not discovered. And the information in DNA. Where did the information in DNA come from? If you really talk to a scientist who's honest, they'll say those questions have not been answered. Or they'll say it happened on the backs of crystals, like in the video. But even so, they would say, even though these questions are not answered, given more time, science will provide us with those answers. And to say God did it and move on is to be a lazy scientist. You want to roll up your sleeves, get to work, because the answers are out there. And you got that sentiment when you were watching the video. That was pretty much what, that's basically what Michael Shermer said. That's basically what a lot of those guys said in the video that they were interviewing, some of the more famous atheist scientists, that basically we're being lazy because we're just asserting that God did it and we're not looking for the scientific explanation. Anybody ever encountered that? God of the gaps? Ever heard of God of the gaps? Okay, well, people use this argument a lot, and they use it to basically show that, that this isn't really science. You're just asserting a religious superstition to fill in the gaps of your knowledge. So how do we respond? Well, the first response would be that time hasn't helped the questions. Rather, it has made the problem worse. And so as science rolls along, we make more and more discoveries about the cell. Recent discoveries about the cell show that the amount of that the DNA is actually an information-bearing signal that it's information. It's supposed to both a storage and retrieval mechanism of information. And the information that's stored is more complex than all of the computer codes written by mankind combined. New evidence, I read something recently that there's evidence that there may be layers of language on top of language. Whereas, think of if you had a sentence that you read it in English, but you skipped to the fourth letter, it also said something in Spanish. There's stuff like that going on in the DNA, potentially. It's just incredible. It's just the more we discover about it, the more it increases the argument for design rather than provides explanations. The more it raises the bar for naturalism to have to hurdle to explain. The explanatory bar of non-naturalistic causes is raised as time goes by. Same thing is true with the fine-tuning of the universe and our knowledge that the universe began and our knowledge of the brain. We know so much about the brain, yet we still don't know what consciousness is or where it comes from. That's the mystery. And so science doesn't help, or time doesn't help the naturalist. It hurts it. So that's the first response. The second response is that the justification for invoking causes beyond the natural world is not based upon our lack of knowledge. Rather, it is based upon what we have observed from scientific inquiry. Intelligent design is not an argument from ignorance. It's not saying we don't know how this happened, therefore God did it. It's actually saying, no, these are features of an object that is the product of a mind. If you have these features, it's proof positive that there was a designer. It's not an argument from ignorance. It's saying, when you see these features, it's always the product of an intelligent source. We see these features in life. Therefore, it was the product of intelligent source. We see these features in the fine-tuning of the universe. Therefore, it was the product of an intelligent source. It's not an argument from ignorance. Next one, third response. Couldn't we make a parallel argument? A science of the gaps argument? You know, the assertion is that given more time, science will provide us with those answers. That is they're doing the exact same thing, right? They're saying science will fill those gaps of knowledge. And so, you know, this is it's an important thing for you to be able to respond to, because it's the type of discussion you'll end up getting into if you are in an academic, scientific realm. Guaranteed. These two things, the beyond the science argument and the God of the gaps argument. So those are the reasons why people believe in naturalism. And those are the reasons why we would reject those arguments for naturalism. Does that make sense? Let me know if there's any questions. Yes?
Were you watching the Finger of God?
No. So, let's see, I got a whole page of notes to go. Oh my gosh, 3 pages. Okay, so talk about the problem of there being little to no positive evidence for naturalism, and thus no justification for presuming naturalism. So, aside from these two bogus arguments for naturalism, there really isn't any reason for presuming naturalism. It's just an arbitrary philosophical assertion. There's no justification for it. How could you possibly know that there are no causal powers that exist beyond the natural world? How could you know that? Have you been beyond the natural world to investigate that and tell me it's true? No. Have you seen what lies beyond the physical world to know its ability to affect the natural world? To the contrary, there are actually positive reasons for rejecting naturalism. And we're going to go into that, and it's a very confusing argument. It's going to make you might need to take a break before, but we don't have time. It's another one of those real hard ones you have to think about. But the evolutionary argument against naturalism is a positive argument against naturalism. So the assertion of naturalism is arbitrary. There's no reasons for it. In fact, there are arguments against it. So, and it's just an ad hoc assertion that limits your possible explanations. That's the problem with it. It's limiting the number of the possible explanations. So, next slide, I want you guys to respond to scientism with the suicide tactic. And this is relatively simple. You just say, you define what scientism will say, that science is the only test for truth. How do you respond with that? If I say science is the only test for truth, how do you respond? Say it. How can you prove that with science? So, yeah, you just want to show that that it's self-refuting. But there's lots of things that actually you can't prove with science. You can't prove the laws of mathematics by science. They're presupposed when you do science, right? You can't do science without logic. Logic is actually a philosophical assumption that undergirds science, and it's a metaphysical assumption that's independent of your senses. Logic is not known through the senses. It's rational. Truths of ethics. Ethics are not a scientific question. It's a metaphysical question. Aesthetics, beauty. Remember we talked about beauty that one night, and I made the controversial claim that beauty is actually objective. Aesthetic claims cannot be proven scientifically. Metaphysical truths such as the existence of the external world. You can't prove by science that the external world exists because you can't prove that your sense perception is reliable. You have to just assume it. Remember we talked about that with René Descartes and his Cartesian demon? Remember that? Okay.
How about history?
What do you mean?
Could you prove history with science?
Yeah. You would use like archaeology, the science of archaeology, and studying. But again, it goes back to this whole, the existence of the external world, you can't even prove. I mean, you can't even prove that the external world is real with science, because you have to presuppose that your sense perception is reliable. And that's something that can't be proven scientifically. So there's lots of things that can't be proven scientifically. And the idea that science is the only test for truth is self-refuting, because that statement itself cannot be proven scientifically. Let's see. I have a link on a video. I have no clue how long it is. Should have clicked on it before, but I might need to just skip it. But I'll click on it and see if it's only like 30 seconds. We'll watch it. If not, we will.
Can you comment on the dangers? Yes, I would be glad to comment
Let's
on this.
go.
I believe that this is rife in our culture. Scientific.
All right. It's probably worth watching.
There was a writer who talked about scientism. Yes. Can you comment on the dangers, perhaps? Yes, I would be glad to comment on this because I believe that this is rife in our culture. Scientism is a theory of knowledge. It's not science, it's a theory of knowledge. And what it says is that science, physical science, is the only source of knowledge. So that if something cannot be scientifically proven, it's irrational to believe in it. You should only believe what can be scientifically proven. Now, this is the philosophy that I spoke of that dominated the 1930s and the 40s and that has now collapsed among philosophers who know better. Why? Well, first of all, this is far too narrow a theory of knowledge to be adequate. There are vast ranges of truth that we know and believe and are rational in believing, but that cannot be scientifically proven. For example, logic and mathematics are presupposed by science, not proven by science. Truths of ethics, like what is good or evil, cannot be scientifically established. Truths of aesthetics, the beautiful, like the good, is also not accessible scientifically. Metaphysical truths, like the existence of the external world or the reality of the past, cannot be scientifically proven. These are metaphysical.
Oh, that goes back to what you were saying. Sorry.
Finally, even science itself, ironically, science is permeated by unprovable assumptions, so that if you only believe what can be scientifically proven, you would destroy science. Just one example. In the special theory of relativity, it is assumed that the one-way velocity of light in space from point A to point B is constant. But we can't prove that. All we can measure is the round-trip velocity of light from A to B and back to A again. It could go out at one rate and come back at another. We just have to presuppose or assume that the one-way velocity is constant, but it can't be scientifically proven. So this theory of knowledge is far too narrow to be adequate. But the really crushing criticism, Andrew, was the realization that this theory is self-refuting. Just ask yourself, is the statement, you should only believe what can be scientifically proven, is that statement scientifically provable? Well, no. It's just an arbitrary definition, and it's not even a very good one. So that if you only believed what can be scientifically proven, you should never believe that you should only believe what can be scientifically proven. It's self-refuting. And that's why among philosophers, this theory of knowledge is virtually, universally abandoned. And it's sad to see certain people educated in the earlier era of the 20th century who are still holding on to this. People like Lawrence Krauss, for example, who are scientistic. But you can confidently reject that when your mates tell you that if something can't be proven by science, then it's irrational to believe it.
All right. So, to address what you said, history, the reality of the past. How do you know that the past wasn't created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age? You can't, right? You just have to assume that, right? based upon your experiences, and but just like your sense perception, the past, your memories of the past, you can't prove that they're reliable, or even your study of memories of the past, you don't know that God didn't just, you can't prove that they weren't created 5 minutes ago with the appearance of age. So it's one of those things that's scientifically unprovable. But we all assume that the past is real, right? Even though we can't scientifically prove it. Okay, so, all right, we ready for the confusing thing? You want to take a deep breath? If I haven't confused you so far, you're going to be this is like knock the ball out of the park. This is actually one of the strongest arguments that I will ever present in my whole dealio. It's really single-handedly brought God back into the question. This is part of Plantinga's Reformed epistemology. In the philosophy departments, this argument is like a bomb that was dropped on the playground of the epistemologists. All right, so you ready? So, the claim is that naturalism should lead to skepticism. And this argument is called the evolutionary argument against naturalism. Interestingly enough, Darwin himself recognized that there was a problem with this theory. And he said this: "With me, the horrid doubt always arises whether the convictions of a man's mind, which have been developed by the mind of lower animals, are of any value or are at all trustworthy. Would anyone trust in the convictions of a monkey's mind if there are any convictions in such a mind?" So what he's basically saying is, I believe in the ability of my cognitive faculties, the parts of my brain that produce beliefs. I believe they're reliable, but if I descended from the lower animals, maybe that somewhere along the line, I inherited errors. Is basically what he's saying. Okay, if there are errors in your ability in the part of your brain that forms beliefs, then you would have reason to doubt the beliefs that were formed by that thing that is in error. Does that make sense? Okay, so if we have a reason to doubt our cognitive faculties, we have a reason to doubt all the beliefs that are produced by our cognitive faculties. So now let's look, is there a reason to doubt the reliability of our cognitive faculties? So René Descartes said this. He had a very similar concern. He said, "We may of course suppose that that our existence derives not from a supremely powerful God, but either from ourselves or from some other source. But in that case, the less powerful we make the author of our coming into being, the more likely it will be that we are so imperfect as to be deceived all the time." Interesting thought, right? So it gets even worse. So listen to this. So C.S. Lewis, really, this argument, it's Plantinga is the first to really, put it in philosophical terms and defend it as a philosopher. And make it as a formal argument, but really it can go back to C.S. Lewis. He says, "Supposing that there was no intelligence behind the universe, no creative mind, in that case, nobody designed my brain for the purpose of thinking. It is merely that when the atoms inside my skull happen to..." Sorry, I'm losing my place. "The atoms inside my skull, for physical or chemical reasons, to arrange themselves in a certain way, this gives me, as a byproduct, the sensation that I call a thought. But, if so, how can I trust my own thinking to be true? It is like supposing that a milk jug, it is like upsetting a milk jug and hoping that the way it splashes itself will give you a map of London. But if I can't trust my own thinking, of course I can't thrust the arguments leading to it should be trust the arguments leading to atheism, and therefore have no reason to be an atheist or anything else. Unless I believe in God, I cannot believe in thought, so I can never use thought to disbelieve in God. So here's the argument hashed out in a more concrete way. So you ready? Ready for this? Brains turned on? Okay. So naturalism requires evolution. If you were to think naturalism as a temple, the main altar in that temple would be evolution, right? You can't have naturalism without evolution, right? Right. Naturalism is the belief that there is no God, so how are you going to explain the origin of life? Evolution, right? Evolution uses mutation and natural selection to produce new biological features, right? Mutation and natural selection. Natural selection aims at, it selects for survival value, not truth. Is evolution concerned about what is true? No, its only concern is survival value. Right? Is it adaptive or maladaptive? If it has survival value, it's preserved because the fit survive. If it doesn't have survival value, it dies. Only the fit survive. It doesn't care about truth. Truth is not a matter of concern as far as evolution is concerned. Thus, presupposing that there's no intelligence behind the universe, naturalism, and evolution as an explanation for our existence means that our belief-forming mechanisms would have been produced by a process that aims at survival value and not truth. So the process that brought about your cognitive faculties was a process that's aim was survival, not truth. Okay? Did you understand that? So then we go on to the next one. It is likely that many false beliefs have survival value, such as irrational fears, such as there are all sorts of hosts of different things that you could believe that would result in you getting to the place where all the evolution is concerned is feeding, fleeing, fighting, and reproducing. Right? It doesn't care about anything else. As long as your beliefs result in feeding, fleeing, fighting, or reproducing, that belief, whether it be true or false, is going to be preserved. Plantinga used the example of a tiger avoidance. He talks about prehistoric Paul and tiger avoidance, and maybe the belief that when he sees a tiger, that's the start of a race. So every time he sees a tiger, he runs. That would result in survival. Or if he sees the tiger and he thinks, oh, I want to pet the tiger, but the best way to pet it is to run away from it and hide. Right? So any false belief, you could think of all sorts of false beliefs that would still have survival value. Right? The point is there's no filter for false beliefs that have survival value. There's no filter. If evolution and naturalism were both true, there would be no filter to weed out beliefs with survival value that happen to be false, so long as they aim and again, feeding, fleeing, fighting, and reproducing. Naturalism doesn't care. Sorry, I'm wrapping up. So, thus, if evolution and naturalism are true, this gives us... So, it's very likely that we have inherited false beliefs that have survival value, but how could you know, how could you test that? You would have to be using your cognitive faculties to test it. So, if evolution and naturalism are true, this gives us a reason to doubt the reliability of our own brains, since we have no way of knowing the extent in which we hold false beliefs that were retained for their survival value. Maybe the belief that we are rational and scientific isn't actually true, but it has some form of survival value for us. Right? How do we know? The problem is there's no way to test the reliability of our brains without using our brains. And if we have a reason to doubt the reliability of our own brains, we have a reason to doubt the reliability of any belief that is produced by our brains, including naturalism and evolution. Therefore, if evolution and naturalism are both true, we have reason to doubt that evolution and naturalism are both true. So it's a way of showing that evolution and naturalism is a self-refuting belief. If you have reason to believe in naturalism and evolution, you have reason to doubt naturalism and evolution, because they're based on a brain that you have reason to doubt its reliability. Okay, so, sorry, maybe I didn't explain it that well, but there are some links up here. Let me just end with this quote. All possible knowledge, then, depends on the validity of reasoning. If the feeling of certainty which we express by words must be, and therefore, and since, are a real perception of how things outside our own reality must be, well and good. But if this certainty is merely a feeling of our own minds and not a genuine insight into realities beyond them, if it merely represents the way our minds happen to work, then we can have no knowledge. Unless human reasoning is valid, no science can be true. It follows that no account of the universe can be true unless that account leaves it possible for our thinking to be a real insight. A theory which explained everything else in the whole universe, but which made it impossible to believe that our thinking was valid, would be utterly out of court. For that theory would itself have been reached by thinking, and if thinking is not valid, that theory, of course, would of course be itself demolished. It would have been destroyed. It would have destroyed its own credentials. It would be an argument which proved that no argument was sound, a proof that there are no such things as proofs, which is nonsense. Interesting. All right, let's pray. Father, I just thank you for today. God, I just pray for this understanding of this material to seep in. And God, I just pray that we would be able to clearly delineate these issues between science and naturalism, between the whole, and kind of dismantle this whole conflict between science and religion, and dismantle the difference between creationism and intelligent design. And God, I just pray for more headway in this area. God, it seemed like the tide was changing for a long time. And God, I just pray for more and more research to be done, and just more and more exposure of the stuff that we've already learned about your marvelous creation and how wonderful you are. So God, I just pray for just the future of this movement and where this is going in our country and in the world. And we pray that you would lead many to follow you. And I pray that you would help us as your ambassadors to be instrumental in this regard. We love you and we thank you. In Jesus' name, amen.